This is Laurel Lake Cemeteries, Final Resting Place, Part 1. And the story's going to begin right here at Laurel River Lake. Standing at Flatwoods boat ramp. Building a lake is a big job. This one took about 10 years. Plus another 3 years before the hydroelectric plant started producing. The lake was built from 1964 to 1974. The hydroelectric plant came online in 1977. A lot of tasks have to be done, a lot of engineering, a lot of land reshaping, preparing the shoreline for water levels, excavation, blasting, and one other task was moving bodies out of cemeteries. Laurel River Lake was constructed between 1964 and 1974, with construction continuing another 3 years on the hydroelectric plant, which went online in 1977. This is a completion report for cemetery relocations for Laurel River Lake. This report was published by the U.S. Corps of Engineers in May of 1974 and will be referenced throughout this video presentation. The Army Corps of Engineers contracted the removal of cemeteries with Richardson and Hale out of Owingsville, Kentucky. The work began on July the 28th, 1973, and the contract gave the contractors 60 days to move 320 graves, or until September 25th, 1973. The job was finished early. The original contract called for the removal of 310 graves. However, another 10 graves were discovered, disinterred, and reinterred. In addition, 24 gravestones and monuments were removed and re-erected. Additionally, 295 concrete grave markers were furnished and installed. Out of a total of 320 people to move, 189 of them came from this area. In fact, out of the 9 total cemeteries to be moved, 4 of them were right here in this area. The Corps of Engineers report cited the following cemeteries as being removed and relocated. 1. Pointer with 89 graves. 2. Unknown with 7 graves. 3. Rogers Ford with 133 graves. Number 4 was Williams with 1 grave. Number 6, Rogers with 25 graves. Number 7, Legal with 30 graves. 8 was Vogel with 3. 9 was Delph with 29. Cemetery number 12 was Hensley with 2. Cemeteries 5, 10, and 11 were determined to not be necessary to move. This is the Flatwoods boat ramp. Obviously, due to the recent heavy rains in February, the ramp is almost underwater. But here in the Flatwoods area, 4 cemeteries were either a short walk or a stone's throw away from this very spot. The 4 cemeteries were known as Williams, Rogers, Rogers Ford, and Legal. Now, if you imagine July of 1973, no water in this lake, just the remnants of valley farmland, and the Laurel-Whitley border follows the middle of the lake floor. Right in this area, you would have found Rogers Ford, the not-so-final resting place of 133 souls, each of them headed for a new burial location at a place called Rest Haven. And those 133 people were just here at Rogers Ford Cemetery. This is a layout of the original Rogers Ford Cemetery. As you can see, the Corps of Engineers went to great pains to survey the exact location of each marker. And in some cases, there were monuments. These numbers correspond to graves that actually had monuments. The others, which were unknown field stones, the numbers were used, both the cemetery number and the grave number, for plates that would be added to the reinterment site markers. If you could imagine 1973 and no water in this lake, if you walked about 200 to 300 feet right off of this ramp, you would have walked straight into the Rogers Ford Cemetery and 133 graves. Just to the left of the Rogers Ford Cemetery, about 1,000 feet to the left, and on the Whitley County side, which is beyond the middle portion of the lake, was the Rogers Cemetery. There were 25 graves moved from the Rogers Cemetery. Legal Cemetery, with 30 graves, was located approximately 1,600 to 1,800 feet just up around the first big curve to the left. You can't really see the area from this angle. On the Whitley County side, that was the legal cemetery. So legal was that way, Rogers Ford right off the boat ramp, and Rogers about 1,000 to 1,200 feet out here to the left. The Williams Cemetery was located 3 tributaries down on the left side of the boat ramp. If you count the tributaries, there's the first one. You can see the second one right off of that point. And the third one is located off just there to the left of that thickest tree. There was only one grave in the Williams Cemetery, and it was a gentleman by the name of Speed Nicholson Williams. And when Speed died, he requested that he be buried in the field down in front of his house. So Speed's house was back in there on the Laurel County side of the bank, and the cemetery where he was buried, and the line probably split his property. He was actually buried in Whitley County, but in a field in front of his house. Of course, that field is now covered by Laurel Lake. Speed would not be following the rest of these individuals from the Flatwoods area to Rest Haven, and he now lies in the Wells Cemetery, also here in Keavy and just a few miles away. But these 4 cemeteries were 4 of 9, and the Corps of Engineers made meticulous drawings and records of all the locations, and they inventoried all the graves. Another cemetery was called Pointer, and it was located several miles from here. This is a diagram of the original Pointer Cemetery. The Corps of Engineers took surveying equipment and actually identified exact locations where the graves were. And you see the assigned grave numbers can be traced back to a corresponding number at the final resting place of Rest Haven. So most all of these individuals in the cemetery were unknowns and assigned numbers. This is one of several pages of the inventory list of the deceased. This happens to be cemetery number 1, which was Pointer. And as you can see, there are certain graves that had stones that were marked with names. The vast majority of the 320 graves that were moved, around 295 of them were unknowns. These people lived at a time, and these cemeteries were probably developed between the late 1700s up into the late 1800s, and travel by horseback to go get a stone carved was just beyond their means, if not beyond their financial means. So therefore, the vast majority of the individuals are unknowns, and they were in cemeteries with field stones. Now, the Corps of Engineers came up with a numbering system so that later on you will see that the cemetery number and the grave number for that cemetery was used as they moved the bodies and remarked their reinterment locations. This is one of several pages of the cemetery inventory list of the deceased. In some instances where names were visible on stones and next of kin could be reached, choices were made to reinter their loved ones in cemeteries other than the reinterment choice cemetery of Rest Haven. As you can see here, Locust Grove and Wigington are referenced as reinterment locations. This happened in a few instances, but the vast majority of the unknowns, there was no way of reaching any next of kin, so they ended up in Rest Haven. In fact, only 32 out of 320 individuals went elsewhere. 288, or 90% of all Laurel Lake cemetery relocations, went to Rest Haven. This is the Corps of Engineers map of the Laurel River Lake area, showing the original locations and relocations, and you can notice the scale. But over in this area of the lake, you will notice cemeteries 7, 3, 6, and 4. Cemetery 3 is located at Flatwoods, immediately off the boat ramp. That is Rogers Ford. Cemetery 7, that is a cemetery that was known as Legal. Cemetery 6 is Rogers, and cemetery number 4 was Williams. Across the way, you follow the river, the lake, to the reinterment site over at Rest Haven, just barely across the Laurel County line into Knox County. Keep in mind, this is a map from 1974. There are things that are there today that are not on this map. For example, the road into Grove and a number of other things that have changed a lot since 1974. And there's another map that shows the location of the other 5 cemetery locations. This is the second map, which shows the location. There's the dam there, and you can see cemetery 1 up here is Pointer. Pointer's located in an area sort of in between Good Branch and Sam Branch, and when you look at it, it appears to be in an area that is well above the water level, but the Corps of Engineers had plans for this area other than just lake. You got recreational areas and camping sites, and Pointer was likely moved because of the development of campsites to the Holly Bay camping area. Cemetery number 2, that is the cemetery that was unknown. It had no name, located in the water just off of the edge as you turn to the left to go up Marsh Branch. So the cove that goes right up through here is Marsh Branch. Cemetery 2 is unknown. The unknown name. Down in the area close to Walker Branch, and by the way the crow flies, maybe a half a mile from the Whitman Branch shooting range, was cemetery number 9, which was called Delph. Over in this area, cemetery number 8 was Vogel, and that's on Whippoorwill Creek. Cemetery number 12, Hensley. There again appears to be back away from the water quite a bit, but if you compare this to maps today, that's very close to the road that currently takes you into Grove Marina. This area was known as Grove back then. Grove Marina is in this area, so cemetery number 12 probably relocated because they knew that future development would occur. In part 2 of Laurel Lake Cemetery's final resting place, we'll take a look at Rest Haven, the reinterment site, and how time and oversight has dishonored these ancestors and their memory. Thanks for watching.